Armanim, very warm welcome to yet another episode of Coffee Table. Whenever we see conflict and some sort of a disaster, and there's obviously efforts to roll it, if not roll it back, then give some relief or try to mitigate it, we hear one name, and that is Oxfam. Oxfam has been engaged in Pakistan since 1973, and now the role of this organization is, if not changing, then they're readopting to the current needs. We have today with us Miss Penny Lawrence, who is the Deputy Global Head of the organization and managing the program of this organization in dozens of countries in Africa and in Asia and other parts of the region. So ma'am, very warm welcome.
Thank you very much.
I would just, from the very beginning, I would like to ask you, do you think that man-made disasters are taking precedence over the natural disasters? So now the narrative is very important.
I think a few years ago we all thought that there would be an increase in natural disasters because of climate change, but we thought that conflict-related disasters would decline. But I'm afraid that's not the evidence. So the evidence suggests that conflict-based disasters and our responses to them have increased, and natural disasters have increased. So if you think of Yemen, if you think of Syria and Lebanon and Jordan and so on, it's obvious to sort of think, yeah, okay, so yes, you're right. The disasters made by people and by conflict are actually increasing, and the disasters that are more natural in cause are also increasing.
And is it making your task more difficult, or just to respond to them? Because when the disaster is man-made, then obviously establishments and the militaries are involved and other things.
No, it is making our life more challenging, because at the same time as this growing numbers of disasters, there is also increased capacity and capability in both the governments of the countries affected and in the civil society organizations of the countries affected. So we are having to change the way we work. I think if it's a disaster that completely overwhelms the country, it's the same model. So in response to the Nepal earthquake, for example, we were sending in foreigners and so on, because simply the government said, we can't cope, help. In cases like, for example, in the floods in Sindh in 2010, I think that was a similar situation. But in 2012, we already had made a lot of progress with organizations that had built their capacity. And so we channeled our aid through those organizations and through district governors who really had developed a capacity and capability then to really respond to the needs of their people. So every time we respond to a disaster, we have to look and we have to shift to make sure what we're doing fits both the context but also fits the capacity of the local environment.
Right. So that is the atmosphere. What is your program now?
So our program...
How would you like to explain for the common people?
So our program now on the humanitarian front is to work on three different fronts, really.
Right.
One is to continue to develop the quality and the speed of our own response. The second is to really build the capacity, continue to build the capacity together with our partners of the whole system, how local NGOs are involved, how district and provincial governments are involved, and the INGOs. And we work in that way through a good coordination mechanism, either in Pakistan that's provided by NDMA, or in other countries it's provided through the UN system. And then the third area we work on is trying to reduce, as you said at the beginning, disasters altogether. So with disaster risk reduction, we have a lot of strategies that try and make sure that we are reducing the risks that vulnerable people continue to face. Because our theory of change is that those that are most affected by disasters are always the poorest people in a country. If you're rich, you can often prevent disasters from happening from where you live or the choices you can make. If you're poor, that's rarely the chance. So, and we're working across the, if you like, the operational divide all the way to the advocacy end to make sure that happens.
So the distribution of aid is also an issue.
Yes, it is. I think aid can play a very useful role in places like Pakistan. It's more, government revenues are much bigger than the aid proportion. In other countries, so if you take, for example, the Democratic Republic of Congo or Somalia, then they are very dependent on aid for everything they do. So each country is different in different contexts, but we're trying to make the best use of aid wherever the context and whichever the country.
So, do you think in countries like Pakistan, Afghanistan and other countries, especially in the Middle East, now the role is being transformed or changing given the local needs?
Yeah, and it's become a bit politicized. So to be honest, I think we are very concerned throughout this process where we recognize we need to change, but we don't want to politicize humanitarian aid. We want to make sure we stick to the principles.
But some narrative has to be given.
Yeah, and we stick to the principles of humanitarian relief, which is impartiality. That's the first principle. And we deliver aid on the basis of need. But what's happened in the sector is that everyone has developed their own speciality over time, because we've been doing this since the 1940s, really. So, and our speciality is WASH, is water and sanitation in an emergency, and it's also cash programming, food and secure livelihoods. So for example, in 2010, the government, NDMA, is very well aware of our capacity in WASH, and they asked us for a lot of help in 2010. They asked us for less help, still some help, but it was more help on the technical side, I think, in 2012. So we will play to our own strengths, but we have to be coordinated through a government mechanism, or as I say, through the UN.
And this cash grant is close to livelihoods?
Yes, often what people need to spend their money on is slightly different. So if a family has been pushed out of their home by the water, maybe they have a sick relative and their priority is to buy medicines for the sick relative. Another family might have an urgent need for clothing because they left without anything, another one food. So this allows them to spend money on what they think is their proper needs. And actually the government in Pakistan has been a real pioneer of this approach, giving small ATM-like cards to people who are affected, and then actually making sure that they get some small but regular income over the period of the emergency to allow them to purchase the things they need. This is very advanced in its thinking.
All right. Are you looking forward to dovetail them with the Sustainable Development Goals in some way?
So the Sustainable Development Goals, there is a big conference in September that will finalise them, but the drafts we've seen look pretty good. And they're very aligned with Pakistan's Vision 2025, actually, which I think is a great development plan. On the humanitarian front, then disaster risk reduction is there. I think we could suggest some extra wordings and some nice fine tweakings, of course, because that is our want. But in general, I think we are very pleased with the priority in the draft we've seen that has been given to climate change and to disaster risk reduction. There's one issue actually that we would like really urgently to see in the SDGs, which is, unless the world keeps global warming to 2 degrees, really what is happening in Sindh at the moment in terms of the sheer temperatures is going to get worse and worse. And that was agreed by Pakistan, UK, lots of governments through the UNFCCC, but it hasn't made it into the SDGs. So there are things like this. They are, they're relatively small lines, but they are big issues in terms of making sure that they are there in the SDGs. So we are still lobbying on that front.
Right. So here we take a short break, and after the break we'll further analyze the situation and what the response of the Oxfam and how they are thinking. So please stay with us.
It's diverse.
It's original.
It's SDTV.
Welcome back. So tell us more about the SDGs. How do you think they can take your program and make them, how can you proceed further by pursuing these goals which have been agreed?
Well, we are very excited about these goals. The MGGs, their precursor, was really, I think it was used very well, but after the event, because nobody really understood what they were going to look like, and nobody got their act together to sort of lobby for changes. So they were less sophisticated, shall we say.
Right.
So I think the MDGs has been a successful tool, but not necessarily delivered all the changes that were needed. Now, everyone knew that the SDGs were coming, and everybody has got their act together to prepare for this event. And so I think it feels like they are much more owned and much more collective. The disadvantage of that is that there are many more goals. And so we have to be careful as a community, as a whole development community, that what we don't do is we don't communicate the SDGs in a complicated way, otherwise nobody will understand them. And I mean, they could be summarised as, I think the world faces 3 very difficult challenges. We've mentioned one of them, which is climate change. The other one that we haven't mentioned so much is growing inequality.
Yeah.
You know, extreme inequality will not allow us to overcome all the gains that we've made on tackling poverty. This is a really important one, and again affects our humanitarian agenda all the way through to the people that we're working with on the long-term development programme. But it is really quite outrageous that if you got a bus and you put 80 people on the bus, well, in Pakistan you get a lot more people on it, but in the UK you put 80 people on a bus, that many people own the same as 3.5 billion people in the world. Yeah. I mean, that cannot be right. It really cannot be right. And I'm really excited to see in Vision 2025, for example, that Pakistan recognises this, and extreme inequalities is not something that the Pakistan government wants to tolerate either, really wants to tackle it. That, and then I think the way that we need to make sure that all citizens feel they have a voice in this process. So those 3 big issues could be the way that the SDGs are communicated, and everything else can fall under those. So we hope there'll be a good way of communicating. And then the second issue for us is, once you've got them agreed, fantastic, but then it's how they will be implemented that is the challenge. And we hope to work with governments where they have very sensible plans, like 2025, and we will work to support governments to develop national plans where they don't have those existing plans already. And then we will continue to work on the ground to really deliver on those goals, because they will prioritise our work, they will inform our work for the next 10 years or so.
Right. So this extreme inequality, do you think it has also something to do with governance and all?
I think in any market-based system, as we know, if you don't have any checks and balances in a market-based system...
I'm not saying corruption.
No, I'm not either. It's actually the market system, I would say, and it's a global issue. But unless you have checks and balances in that system, then it can lead to extreme inequality. This is well known whether you're an economist on the right wing or an economist on the left wing. Actually, everybody agrees. So what I think is needed is more checks and balances in the system. And if you look at where there are particular issues at the moment, I would point to tax dodging as being one that is really critical, because if rich people are allowed, because they have the money, they can hire the legal frame, the legal lawyers and all the accountants, etc., to find ways of dodging tax, then that is not serving the government of Pakistan, it's not serving any government. So we really want an intergovernmental group to look at this issue and come up with some really practical ways forward on how global governance can tackle tax dodging.
And tax policy as well.
And tax policy, I think, there are tax policies, I would say, even in Pakistan, where, indirect taxes really, really penalise poor people. Yeah. Sales tax, it's poor people who suffer. And direct taxes can be much more progressive and much more targeted than indirect taxes. So we would encourage any government really to want to develop a progressive tax regime that has more direct and less indirect taxes in its policy.
Okay, so sustainable development goals, it's a buzzword in itself.
It is, yeah.
What are the main hurdles?
I think the main hurdles, as I said, are really around implementation. So the draft we've seen is pretty good. We'd tweak it to improve it, but actually it's around how they're implemented and then how they're monitored with people. The people that really matter in this are the citizens that are affected by them. So how will poor people hold their governments to account? How will poor people hold the UN and all those developing the SDGs to account? How will they be involved in actually delivering on this agenda? So I think all of those issues are ones that we really need to focus on. We're pretty good at coming up with policies as a global community, not so good, I would say, at implementing them.
Right. So are you looking forward to have some sort of a if not partnership, I mean some close association with the government. And
Very much so, yes.
Yeah. How?
Well, I had an excellent meeting with the Minister of Planning, for example, while we are here, and we supported the government in developing its development plan at that level. But we're also working with provincial governments and with district officials. Just yesterday I met a really good district, I think he was the Deputy District Administrator, who is already coordinating the local NGOs and the international NGOs working in, this was actually in Dadu in Sindh, and he's making sure that they're focusing on effective citizen groups, on providing water. So he's really coordinating things in a way that really plays to the delivery of that plan. And that is exactly what we want to see and what we want to support.
Yeah. So here we take another break. After the break, we'll continue the program. So please stay with us.
It's diverse.
It's original.
It's SDTV.
Welcome back. So ma'am, what is the global picture at the moment?
The global picture is positive in some ways and challenging in other ways. So I think what's very positive is, if you look at how many poor people there were in, say, 1980, 2 billion people were abjectly poor. 2010, it was 1 billion. So we are really making progress. That's very positive. I think this next time will be very difficult. This next period will be very difficult because the poor people now are very marginalized people, especially in countries like Pakistan. Ethnic minorities, people who are living in far-flung places, people who have multiple issues of poverty, disability, women's rights, etc., etc. So I think it will be increasingly challenging. And I think something you mentioned at the beginning, the increased politicization of our area is going to be a real challenge. So it was assumed that NGOs like ours were doing very good things and we were left free to do what we thought was the right thing in combination with the governments at all. But I suppose our accountability was pretty weak, to be honest.
Internal accountability?
Not internal accountability, but I think our accountability to the governments in which we were working. I don't think too many questions were asked, and I don't think we were very good at sharing information. Now that situation has changed for good and for bad. It is quite right that we improve our accountability, especially to the poor people we serve and to the governments who are hosting us when we are here. Absolutely right.
$1 per capita.
Absolutely. But what is not right is I suppose the space for civil society. Pakistan has very progressive laws on the right to a voice, the right to hold a group and to protest if that's what you wish to do. But in many countries, this feels like it is being challenged from an understandable perspective, but a complex one to do with global security. So global security, and Pakistan must look after its people and protect its people, and that is in the interests of not only Pakistan, but other countries like mine in the UK as well. But then the kind of legislation that is leading to is also having a knock-on impact onto organisations like Oxfam and national civil society. And the voice of people somehow, and it's really tricky to get right, but somehow we have to allow the voice of the people to still come through, even though we're dealing with the security situation. So actually managing the two is very complex, and I think that's something, we're open for increased scrutiny, and we should be as INGOs and as national NGOs. That's not a problem. But I think the link to the security agenda, the suspicion that arises, because if you're trying, that arises, and if you are trying to be an impartial humanitarian actor, and they know that you are somehow linked to, security forces in some way, then I think people will be very suspicious. I would be suspicious. So it's how we do our work, and we somehow protect the space for civil society voice. And organisations like Oxfam are very organised, but it's the voice of national civil society in particular.
Do you think you need to spend some resources and time on developing that common narrative with the countries and the governments?
Yes, I think you're right. I think we've not been very good at communicating.
Yeah.
And we haven't been as proactive as we should have been in showing our accountability. It's all very well to be accountable, but if you keep the books to yourself and you don't share them to show what you are doing and what money is coming in and where it is going to, then I think that also isn't right. So I think you're right, there is a big communications job that we need to do. It's interesting that in Pakistan, and I've had the privilege to come to Pakistan over several years, but local people know us very well and know what we're doing.
Yeah, also, you know.
Yeah, and district people sometimes in the districts we've been working in, we're very well known. Provincial, less well known. Central government, we haven't been so well known. So I think we haven't done ourselves so many favours in terms of making the connections and communicating what we're doing in a way at the grassroots level to those in power at the top, and actually vice versa. So I think we need to get better at that.
But SDGs are in the developed countries as well.
They are, absolutely. We'll hold our own government to account
Yeah.
as well.
So it is becoming difficult as well at the global level.
Well, even in our own country, we work on poverty issues in the UK, and that's very important for us to look at poverty everywhere. And we've had an election recently, and we were challenged by the Charity Commissioner as to whether a programme that we had tackling poverty issues in the UK was political or not. We made our arguments and explained ourselves, and we were exonerated in this case. But also, to give you another example, we were asked questions about our response in Gaza. Again, there are politicians in the UK who are suspicious about humanitarian work in Gaza. We explained what we were doing and that it was completely based on humanitarian need, and again, we were exonerated. But it's just very interesting that those questions are being asked, when I would say for the last 10 years we've had very few of those types of questions asked. So it is absolutely in our own country as well as...
Anything towards the end of the program, if you want to say something?
Well, I'd just like to say how privileged it is to work in Pakistan and to work with a government that has such a clear vision as 2025 and such a well-developed civil society that is very capable and has such a strong voice. But Pakistan is very challenged by government politics and also by the climate. And we are here and we stand alongside you. And if we are needed, we are here. If we are not needed, then that's fine. We don't need to be here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And with this, we come to the end of the program. Next time, next guest, new topic. So please keep watching our program.